Big difference between China and Japan. The Chinese insisted on doing things their old ways. Your book calls it steeped in tradition. And the Japanese were willing to learn from the West. The result was, and even the Chinese will tell you this, the Chinese fell behind, the Japanese forged ahead, and Japan wound up becoming the great power of that part of the world, and they almost conquered China. But again, it was because, and even, I've had Japanese men I've talked to one-on-one admit this. China made its big mistake by not copying the West. Japan did. The Japanese are great copiers. When they copy something, they usually figure out a way to improve it. Copy and improve. And we had a case at Lockheed where some Japanese men came from Japan and started looking at our machinery, and they would actually get in their suits and ties and crawl up in those dirty, greasy machines, woolly machines, and take notes. They went home, copied what they saw from our machinery, and made a better machine than anything we had, and sold the machine to us. And we kept it in operation for some 20 years. Yeah, we call it the SNKs, Shin Nippon Koki. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. But anyway, we ran those SNKs for some 20 years, but they had copied the machines from us. The Japanese, you can't name very many things that they invented down through the centuries, but they copied and improved upon. And anyway, they copied the West. All right, chapter 23. World War I. World War I caught a lot of the world by surprise because Europe had not really had a major war since the Napoleonic Wars that ended 99 years before. The Congress of Vienna had set in motion, the Congress of Vienna had set in motion the policies of balance of power that helped to guarantee that all the sides of Europe would be equal, two sides would be equal, and that therefore each side would be deterred from trying to go to war with the other side. And this worked for some 99 years. The problem was it guaranteed that when a war did break out, the war would be just awful. World War I was the most horrible war in history up to its time. We in the United States almost have forgotten about it. Now, hey, when I was growing up, so many of the older men and our teachers were World War II vets, and I recall at one point asking my mother, "Mom, was there a World War I? I hear all this talk about World War II." She said, "Oh yes, there was a World War I." We Americans almost forgot about it because we Americans only lost about 50,000 men in World War I. Compared to European countries, Germany lost almost 2 million, France lost about 1.5 million, and Russia lost about 2 million. Great Britain lost almost 1 million. I mean, you know, the United States, some 50,000. We did not suffer nearly as much as the Europeans did. But it has been said that almost every enlisted man who joined Europe's armies in 1914 was killed. Almost every enlisted man who joined in 1915 was killed. A few who joined in 1916 survived, and some more who joined in 1917 managed to survive, and most who joined in 1918 survived. There was one exception, one enlisted man. Yes?
What was the first day?
The war went from 1914 to 1918. Yeah, began in 1940. These are dates, yes, I definitely would want you to remember. Um, 1914 to 1918. Now, one exception, one enlisted man who managed to survive all 4 years of the war was a man named Adolf Hitler. He joined in 1914, and apparently his superiors did not like him, and they gave him the worst job that could be given a man. He was given the job of messenger, carrying messages from one trench to another one, and generally, the man who got this job lived only a few hours. Hitler survived it for 4 years. Now,
That's World War I.
World War I, yeah. Oh yeah, Hitler became very prominent in World War II. But Hitler was a World War I vet. Hitler survived it 4 years as a messenger. decorated twice for bravery. Most men who survived a battle in World War I were given promotions. And to lead the other younger troops who had just joined, Hitler was never given a promotion, probably because his superiors did not believe he was a leader of men. Yes?
Was there a reason why they didn't like him, or?
It's Hitler.
That is something we cannot tell. It might be that his superiors really didn't like him and gave him that job just to try to get rid of him, and he didn't get rid of him. The man had personality issues and problems, and again, they never gave him a promotion. And anyone who had survived as many battles as he did would have got to the rank of captain at least. He didn't. Apparently, his superiors did not like him. They decorated him twice for bravery. But he managed to live through it. And again, this is just one of the coincidences of history. Now, one reason Europeans have not forgotten World War I, and we Americans have, is World War I was something where that our young men were called into the army and sent abroad for a while, and a few months later they were back home. Most men went overseas in 1918 and returned home in 1918. Just gone a few months, and a lot of them didn't see a whole lot of action. We had 2 million men that wound up going overseas, and most of them never saw combat. In the case of the Europeans, there were numerous changes made, permanent changes made on the European scene. For one thing, the royal house of I'll start with Russia. The royal house of Russia became extinct. I mean, they shot the Tsar and his family, and the royal house no longer rules. Same thing can be said for Austria, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. In this case, not only did the royal line of the Ottoman Empire end, the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist. There is no Ottoman Empire anymore, and it hasn't been since 1918. But 4 countries lost their royal families. These nations, of course, still exist. The Ottoman Empire doesn't. In addition, the nations of Europe that still allowed their nobility to have a say-so, do this and count that, these nations, the nobles, lost what little authority they had left. Now, granted, Great Britain, which was on the winning side, of course, got to keep its monarchy, and they still have their dukes and counts, but Great Britain had already destroyed the power of the nobility. In the case of Germany and Austria, their nobles lost their authority. Russia, very similar. Their nobility lost their authority. The Ottoman Empire, very similar. So in other words, there were some permanent changes made to the society of Europe. And in fact, one book I read not too long ago said that World War I actually did a lot more to change European society than World War II did. We think of World War II because more lives were lost, it was more devastating, and it was more recent, of course. But World War I actually did a lot more to change Europe than did World War II. Some of the things that led up to World War I, nationalism. Again, I'm looking on page 666 now. A feeling that our nation is best, we're for our country, right or wrong. Nationalism. But in addition, within each nation was a whole lot of dissent. The workers were tired of receiving low wages and working under unsanitary, unsafe conditions. Your poor people were tired of basically of being poor. Your people living in autocratic countries such as Russia and Germany wanted change. Austria too. I mean, they'd had revolutions in 1830, 1832, and 1848. And they were ready for another revolution. And the ruling classes in these countries knew that, hey, our people are ripe for revolution. And this pressure to reform was intense, and the ruling classes did not want to reform. And the ruling classes decided, hey, I'll tell you what we need. I mean, they decided among themselves, we need a war to get people on our side and to quench this spirit of dissent. So basically, the Tsar, the Kaiser, the Emperor here, they wanted war because they believed it would strengthen their position. Now, if they could have seen the outcome, but we don't see the future. If the Tsar could see him and his family all lined up before a firing squad, and when they fell down, they went into a mud hole where their bodies would remain for the next 70 years. If they could have seen that, the Russian Tsar might not have wanted war. If the Kaiser could have seen himself operating a hoe, as a hoe man, a farmer, living in the Netherlands in exile, he might not have wanted war. As it was, each side believed they could win. And in reality, all sides, for all practical purposes, all sides lost. Another thing that led to the war was militarism. These nations began building up standing armies using conscription, in other words, a draft, where that they would say that every person from the ages of such and such to such as expected to join the army and serve for a certain amount of time. And they began to keep large standing armies. The Russian army was the largest with 1.3 million men, but the French and German armies had about 900,000 men each. British and Austrian numbers British and Austrian armies going between 250,000. Don't worry so much about the numbers. Just know that the sides were forcing their young men to join the army by conscription, militarism, to support this standing army. They would develop civilian bureaucracies. In other words, the job of the civilian bureaucracy was to collect the taxes from the people and see to it that the goods and supplies that the army needed were given to the troops. So in other words, to keep these troops fed and clothed and housed and supplied with ammunition cost a whole lot of money. And the rest of the civilian population is expected to work to supply these people, these troops, with the food and ammunition and clothing and barracks that they needed. All right, so basically Europe became one big military camp. Some people describe it as a powder keg. That all it would need was somebody to light a fuse and the whole thing would go off. The fuse turned out to be the Balkan region of Europe. Your book shows the map over on page 667. The Balkan states consisted of, at that time, of Greece, Serbia, Albania, Bulgaria, and Romania. For many years, some of these nations were not even on the map. Serbia, Albania was left off the map for many years, and finally they got back on. They were under control of Yugoslavia. A whole lot of nations in Europe ceased to exist for a time after World War I. Again, owing to a whole lot of geographical changes that were made as a result of World War I. Essentially, what happened was, in the summer of 1914, the heir to Austria's throne had the title of Archduke. Archduke Ferdinand was shot dead, along with his wife. And he was shot dead by a Serbian in the country of Serbia. And this was the fuse that lit off the whole war. Now, I must mention, I should have already mentioned before I got to the big event that set it off, that these nations of Europe had set up a treaty system, secret treaties, with the smaller nations. Europe consists of strong nations and weak. The weaker nations would ally themselves with strong. Reminds me of when I was in elementary school, going to a country school, and the younger boys would sometimes get a big boy on their side. And hey, if you beat me up, I'll get my friend over here, or my neighbor who's bigger than you are, and he'll beat you up. Some of you might know a little bit about what I'm talking about. This was the way that Europe was operating, except, but basically, what I want you to know is Belgium, small country of Belgium, had a treaty with Britain. Now, there were many more treaties, but these were the main ones. Belgium had a treaty with Great Britain. Russia had a treaty with Serbia. Now, Serbia was a small country. Belgium was a small country. In the meantime, Austria had a treaty with Germany. And France had a treaty with Russia. Some of these alliances may seem strange in view of what's going on in 2014, but this was before Russia had become communist. All right. Again, this explains, so there are several other treaties, but this explains how some of these nations got involved. To make a long story short, folks, Austria decided Serbia needed to be punished. So Austria began to make moves on Serbia. And when Austria made a move on Serbia, Russia stepped in and they told Austria, we're going to war with you. When Russia went to war with Austria, Germany stepped in on the side of Austria, and they went to war with Russia. Well, when Austria and Germany went to war with Russia, France stepped in. That still left Britain out of the picture, and Britain might have remained out of the picture, folk, and Germany might have won. Except that Germany had devised a battle plan anticipating the war. Germany devised a battle plan where they would go around France's defenses by going through Belgium. Now again, if you look on a map, you can see how it worked. The border between France and Germany was well fortified. But what Germany did was go through Belgium. Belgium's a low, flat country, easy to get an army through. And when they went through Belgium, Great Britain declared war on Germany. That got Great Britain involved. So basically now you have Britain, France,
Russia.
yeah, thank you, France and Russia on one side, Germany and Austria on the other side. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire eventually joined on the side of Germany and Austria. So you have these on the one side. Now, where does this, the other major nation in Europe, where does this leave Italy? Italy had a treaty with Austria. Now, let me tell you something about it before, I have to make a disclaimer here like my teacher did when I was a freshman in college. He did something I'm not going to do. He asked, how many of you are Italians in here? And several hands went up. He said, I'm sorry, I have to make a whole lot of bad statements about Italy. Italy suffered terribly during both world wars, and their armies lost like crazy. I'm not blaming the Italian foot soldier. I'm not blaming it. I am blaming the leadership. Italy was supposed to have sided with Austria. Instead, Italy bolted Austria, broke their treaty with Austria, and sided with Britain, France, Russia. But Italy's performance was so bad during the war that they actually hurt Britain and France and Russia more than they helped them. And Britain and France had to send their troops and equipment to save Italy from extinction. Basically, it's like the side Italy was on, Italy was a terrible liability. It's like having a ball player on your team who's a constant outmaker. Does nothing. You get a rally going and this player steps up the plate and stops it. Any of you who played baseball or softball know what I'm talking about. Italy was the outmaker. But anyway, they wound up siding with Britain and France and Russia when they should have sided with, and have had Italy sided with Austria. Perhaps Britain and France and Russia have had an easy time on it. All right, thank you. Yeah, that clock's still a bit faster than mine. All right, well, anyway, you do have a point here. I guess I do need to stop here.